Cool. Dominic Caddy here with Stare Down TV. I am here with Sam McKenzie. Sam, why don't you do a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Thanks for having me on. So, my name's Sam McKenzie. I'm a nutrition exercise scientist, and I run a company called Science to Health. We work with a range of different combat sporting athletes and basically apply the cutting edge science to try and help them make weight in the best way possible, the safest way possible, so they can perform optimally.
Nice, man. Obviously, just going through, if anyone wants to check your Instagram, I'll add your handle in. Some of the athletes you're working with, you've got Jack Catterall, who's WBO Intercontinental. He's undefeated. Sam Eggington, who's been a part of some very big fights. You also work, I believe, with Muhammad Ali, who's the first diabetic pro boxer in the UK.
Yeah, so these are boxers that over the last couple of years that I've either worked with for a camp or that I'm continually working with. So yeah, it's been a nice bit of experience to work with lots of different people.
Nice, mate. So how did you kind of get into the combat side of things? As in, I mentioned a little bit about your story. It'd be great to know, how you sort of got into fitness overall and nutrition, but what made you decide to work with not only combat athletes but also endurance athletes like runners and stuff?
Yeah, so the route into combat sports wasn't a typical kind of story, really. I went to school with Jack Catterall. We were in primary school together.
Nice.
And then after school, we kind of saw each other every once in a while, as you do with people when you kind of move on from school and stuff. And then I went in to study the sports sciences. Jack obviously was progressing through with his boxing career. And then we once caught up and he asked me what I was up to, told him what I was studying and stuff and setting up my own company. And he said, can you give us some tips on the nutrition? And then we both sat down and I was amazed at how kind of the sport was so far behind in terms of the science.
Yeah.
And it just went from there. Basically, I saw an opportunity that I could help him and then it just exploded from there and here we are now.
Nice, man. So when in his career was that?
That was 2 years ago. It's coming up to 2 years. So I've worked with him for about 5 fights now.
Great. And so how have you seen the differences from that first fight you worked with him to now? Like what's kind of from the science point of view, what's really changed for Jack?
It's the difference in focusing on, what the fighters have as their priority. So most of the time when I'm meeting fighters, I'm just seeing that their main priority is making weight at the expense of their health and performance. What I want to try and work with them to do is help them focus on the nutrition for performance, not just making weight. So that means making sure that they're fueling the camp, not restricting food, that they're recovering properly, eating when they should be, and eating enough so that they can still make weight, of course, but that they're not neglecting the needs. Because, if you want the best from your body, how can you expect to get the best from that when you're not fueling properly and giving your body what it needs?
And that's it, mate.
Difference.
Yeah, and that's it. And obviously, so we cover boxing and sort of MMA across this channel. It's more of a rarity to see people missing weight in boxing. Obviously, it can happen, but obviously with boxing, there's a lot more. The weight classes are a lot closer together, so you can kind of pinpoint. Whereas MMA, they're like sort of 10-pound differences. Have you ever done any work inside with MMA fighters at all?
Yeah, I've done in the kind of amateur side. I've done a bit of MMA, BJJ. So yeah, I agree with you on that. Obviously, because with boxing, the weight classes are closer together. But even in boxing, you still see some crazy cuts and people kind of practicing things from 20 years ago where the science isn't getting in, and obviously even more so with MMA.
So when you see someone, putting on a tracksuit, jumping in a sauna and stuff, like, for you, what is that? Is that just, are you just looking at them like, what? How are you still doing this?
Yep. But I don't look at it kind of in a judgmental way. It's kind of like, as old as the sport of boxing is, some of these things have never changed. They've just gone from generations where kind of athletes become coaches, and then this gets passed down. And yeah, there's numerous times where I've been working with a fighter and they're kind of doing sweat sessions 6 weeks out from a fight when that's only just going to lose water and it's going to dehydrate them. They're just going to put that straight back on when they drink again. And the goal of that point in camp is to lose body fat.
Nice, mate. And so, sort of going into, say, fight week, for example, obviously every fight is different. Is there kind of like an optimal range of weight you want someone to be in? Obviously, you want to be them carrying a lot of water going into that week. Is there like okay, so for Jack, say Jack, for example, in his last fight, kind of how far off was he going from the Monday to the Friday weigh-in?
Yeah, so there are some kind of generalizations here. Obviously, it does get a bit more specific when you're working with individuals, but I think from a safety point of view and from a performance point of view, most of your work should be done in the lead up to that final week. You should be making sure that you started that camp early enough, not kind of just starting your nutrition 3 weeks before the fight. You should be progressing with that and slowly bringing your body fat down. So that gives you less to do in that final week. That results in safer cuts, and your performance doesn't hurt as much either in terms of a kind of, drastic cut. So ideally they want to be inside 10% away from the weight 1 week out. Yeah. I get quite comfortable with that when fighters are at that point. I call that my green zone. I know I can optimally get them generally to that weight that they need to be at with very little impact on health, and we can really focus on performance. Whereas though if they're coming over 10%, we start to get into a little bit of an uncomfortable range there.
I can imagine, man. And so, when you have someone who's over that 10%, obviously you still don't want to put them into the sauna suit and everything like that. What's your kind of your plan around that?
So with some fighters, obviously this is where we do get to kind of differences. I always class each fighter as having what you call an inverted U. So there is a point that the more you take off weight, the performance improves. So obviously you're in a weight class sport. And the more muscle you can get them to hold at the weight, the better generally performance is. But there comes a point where there's a point of diminishing returns. You can't keep taking weight off and performance improve. There comes a point that drastically drops when you get to a certain point, like a threshold. And that's very individual to each fighter. When it comes to the weight cut, the final week, they all have their limitation or their threshold. And what you've got to make sure is with some fighters, you're not going to be tapping into that threshold as much. So they might even wake up on weight. Wow. And then, you kind of that weight class works for them. Them and their coach have decided that works for them. Some go a bit further than that, as in they are kind of pushing a bit more in terms of the weight cut, and they might have a little bit more to do. But you should be only using kind of saunas or anything like that for, max the final couple of pounds, really.
Nice.
So they are an absolute no. It's how much you rely on them.
So, like I say, obviously some people, they're just every day just killing themselves in a sauna and that's just, that's scientifically proven not the way to be.
Yeah, and that kind of, if people are taking off, I mean, I know this isn't a boxing example, but if we look at Darren Till with his weight cut, when there starts to become a real over-reliance on these kind of methods, and you can clearly see that it's affecting health, and of course it's going to affect performance, you need to ask yourself the question, either one, have your preparations in the lead up to that final week been optimal, and two, are you fighting at the correct weight class?
And that's it, going on to Darren. I think it was just the fact he wasn't. Did you ever see that video of it was the Wonder Boy fight where he was, obviously because it was in Liverpool, he could fight. He could train out of his gym in Cowabon, and there's just a video of him cutting weight up until like 5 a.m, where he's just laying there in towels, hitting pads. He looks like he's on the brink. You think, how is this guy going to fight in what it would have been, like 37 hours later?
Frightening. And I think that it's more common than people think. I think some people think that this is just like kind of theatrical, just for a bit of TV. But when you actually kind of work with a range of different combat fighters, you get to see that these guys are unfortunately going with the information that they think is only out there, that's all they know. And it's sabotaging their actual potential, because these guys could go really far. Some of them, can be world champions, and they're being kind of sabotaged by the nutrition because it's holding them back.
Yeah. So, and sort of going on to that, with obviously I know you've worked with Sam Eggington. What fights did you work with Sam on?
So I worked with Sam last year. We actually we didn't kind of prepare for any fights. It was more his kind of general nutrition, and then just some kind of educational stuff around preparing for fights. So I don't always work with fighters for a specific fight. Sometimes we work on their general nutrition so they can kind of work on things from that point forward.
So when you worked with Sam, was that sort of pre or post the Smith fight?
That was just before, in the build up to it.
Oh, okay. Because
Yeah.
people rated him. Obviously, that was sort of a coming home fight for Smith. So it's understandable people overlooked it. But Sam sort of bounced back from that. He is looking well. So obviously now you've built out a base of fighters and stuff. Obviously, you seem to work with Jack full time because you've known him for years. Is there fighters that you periodically check in on? Like, so with Muhammad Ali, can you tell us a little bit about what you did with himself?
Yeah. So with Ali, we kind of there was a different kind of approach with him, because obviously he was the first diabetic boxer with type 1 diabetes, which was great because he's a great example to to people that have type 1 diabetes, that you can still kind of excel in sport, that is no barrier, and it was really good to kind of have that side of working with him where there was that kind of added layer for us to work with. I enjoy that, because you kind of read in the background with it, educate him on it, he educates me on it from his point of living with that condition, and then just to show that you can still hit optimal performance during that time regardless.
And so how did you work around, obviously I assume, was that your first sort of client who has a type 1 diabetes? So
Yes, in boxing, yeah.
So what was the way of working around that? Because obviously he would have had to deal with this his whole life. So for yourself, like, where do you see, your input on that?
So we worked alongside his medical team for managing the condition, and then from the kind of nutrition implications, it's making sure that you kind of, that a lot of the contrary to people think that you have to avoid carbohydrate, that's actually dangerous advice. You need to make sure that these guys are fueling properly, and kind of managing their blood sugars around the demands of the sport. And as people learn that there's different things that affect your blood sugar, so things can increase your blood sugar, like certain exercise. So anaerobic exercise, so like high intense stuff, can really ramp your blood sugar levels up. Stress can increase your blood sugar levels, and it's not just the exercise that you've got to manage it around, it's everything, and just making sure that all them demands are met.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, mate. And then sort of going on from that, obviously you've done a lot of work with the professional side of things. Do you do any work with amateur athletes or amateur boxers at all?
Yeah, so we offer different packages in terms of we can work with people, kind of really kind of one-to-one intense, and sometimes we also do kind of plans for people. So we have a couple of consultations with them, and then they get a plan to go away and implement. So we're kind of working with all levels of the sport, not just the professional side.
I can imagine, mate, because there's a lot of amateurs. I'm at an amateur gym. Some guys, the way they're making weight still old school, because, like you say, they're listening to coaches who are from the old school. So it's just, it's tough to see at times. We're quite lucky at my gym that we're pretty planned. We've got a strength and conditioning guy, so we're able to help with that. But you see other gyms, and you see 14, 15-year-old kids sort of burning themselves out before they can even excel.
Yeah, I mean, at that age as well, it's a very impressionable age. You can see kind of, and this has happened before in the time that I've been working in the sport, where you can see a lot of, some real damage from these approaches where people are making weight the wrong way, but it's the only way they know. And, they're showing signs of developing eating disorders at very young ages because of the impact that this is having on the body and the relationship with food.
Yeah, I can imagine that, mate. And it's sort of kind of going on from you trying to change the way. Have you had to come up against any sort of old school coaches stuff? If you had to kind of help change their minds, or some people kind of refusing to change their minds?
Yeah, so I think that there's been some people that have been immediately open-minded, and they found it quite refreshing. So you've maybe brought answers that they've been wondering the kind of answers to these questions for years. But there has been some resistance to things as well, in terms of you've not been a boxer before, so why should we listen to you? and I said, you know, that's absolutely fine. But I just then try to explain the kind of research that's been done in this area that's actually emerging with fighters, and we're finding results of making these outcomes happen more efficiently, more safely, and it's having a positive impact on performance. That they give us a chance and we show them the result, and they see that result. That's when they usually get buy-in. But there's been mixed kind of feelings. I'd say most of it is positive and welcoming. But yeah, there is sometimes, you know, those challenges you come up against where people can be quite old school and a little bit reluctant to change. But I can't kind of get that too, because sometimes these guys are really concerned about the welfare of the fighters. They don't want to make anything worse. And they put a lot of trust in us in terms of that. But I don't take that lightly either. I'm making decisions based on real science and make sure that they've been well researched by it before I even consider that decision.
Yeah, and you know, if a coach was to sort of kind of argue your point or say, "Oh, I don't agree with that," obviously it's kind of up to the fighter there to make that decision. They're the ones who, you know, they listen to their coach, of course, but they must also understand that this is your field, this is where you excel. So, do you kind of leave that to the fighter to decide who they want to listen to?
So normally, I think that the best approach. So we look at the fighters that, you know, as the main important. The last thing that they want to be getting is mixed messages, for the nutrition saying one thing, the coach saying another. So I like to kind of build relationships with the coaches best I can, so they can see what I'm about, that I'm not a quack, that I've got the best interest of that fighter at heart, and we sit down together and have a chat. And sometimes it's not the case that I'm coming to the table, I've just met this fighter, say for instance, and the coach knows them well. You know, in most cases they've been working with them a long time. They can probably tell me a lot about their character more than I can. And sometimes that means the coach can actually be really helpful in saying, right, well, that's a great idea, but I know them to be this way, so maybe this might work better. And the coach can be really helpful to you.
That's it, mate. And like I say, if you could all work in one team, like you see, you know, it's kind of like the biggest stars in combat sport, whether it's Canelo, whether it's, you know, going over to the MMA side of things. It seems like the whole team work together, where like nutritionists have a part, the strength and conditioning have a part, the you know, the pad work, everything like that. It all kind of works under one team, and it just shows it's in the science that those are the ones who seem to excel when everything's, you know, everyone's on the same wavelength and you can kind of just push together.
Could not agree more with that, Dom. You're absolutely spot on, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of like, you know, what's your relationship like with, seems like Jack's kind of like your the most recurring athlete you're working with right now. Like, how close are you with his team? Like, do you discuss with just his team sometimes, or is it always as a group?
A bit of both, really. So you know, I'm a bit of an athlete myself, not in combat sports, but in triathlon. So I join in some of the sessions, the kind of running sessions and some of the kind of non-contact stuff. So that you know, you don't just develop rapport with the team, with the coaches, with the whole stable, really. We did the Stockport steps one time, which was just absolutely brutal, but it was well known as a regular for like the likes of Ricky Hatton and people that they've trained in this area. So you know, you get a working development relationship with them, and just updating them on what the plan is. They bounce back with their thoughts, and that is much better than me just delivering it on my own, because, you know, the whole team's better than just me as an individual.
And that's it, mate. You know, like I said before, it's all about kind of all synergizing together. So I can agree with that, mate. Going on, so you said you do triathlons yourself. How long have you been doing? How long have you been a triathlete?
I was a runner first, from, you know, probably early 2010 onwards, then got into triathlon in 2016 to train for an Ironman.
Jeez, how did that go?
Well, I couldn't swim at all, so I had to learn to swim, and it was great from the perspective of kind of, you know, it's all well and good knowing the theories behind the sciences, but actually experiencing them and looking at the advice you're giving people to experience it firsthand. It was a great learning experience.
I can imagine, mate. And you know, going on to sort of doing a little crossover, you know, you got fighters such as sort of Nick and Nate Diaz, Cron Gracie. You know, they in their camps, it is a lot of triathlons. So that's something that they kind of adopt. And I saw, you know, those fighters, example, they do the triathlons, they fight. They're really big on like plant-based diets. Kind of, what's your stance around? Obviously, I'm not sure if you've seen the new documentary Game Changers on Netflix.
It's probably in my whole career, something that I've had the most questions on.
Like, I can imagine, mate, because that's just the biggest thing right now. Like, I'd be at the gym or at boxing, like, oh, you see Game Changers. Like, I was in Subway the other day, and a guy in front of me was like, "Yeah, I've watched Game Changers. So I'll just have the vegan sub, please." I was like, "What?"
Yeah, so I thought this might come up. So with that documentary, and I use that term loosely because my understanding as a scientist of what a documentary is that you show both sides.
It's impartial, yeah. It's an impartial story.
Yeah, and then you let the people who are watching make their own informed decision, but you must at first give them all of the information, not just one side of it. So for me, that was the first big issue, and I wouldn't describe that as a documentary, and I'd go across the board to say that with everything on Netflix with regards to nutrition. I think there was possibly some agendas there, but what I do take from it is that I do agree that most of the diet should be based on plants, because the research out there completely supports that for health, for performance, for kind of health outcomes, disease risks, things like that. But do we need to go as extreme as completely cutting out all animal sources of protein or all animal sources in general? I would say no, the research doesn't support that, which was what that documentary was pushing. But there was also some pretty misleading statements that they were making, whereby I knew exactly which papers they were referring to in that film. And because I've read the papers, my interpretations were completely different to theirs in terms of what they were saying. So I've got some vegan clients, and they make that decision either based on religious views or personal views, and that is completely fine. You've got to respect that and work with them. And yes, they can achieve optimal levels of performance if that diet is structured correctly, and it is a bit trickier to put together because you've got to find different sources of nutrients that they're missing, which are easier to get from animal sources. But that's not to say you cannot still perform optimally. What these documentaries are often saying, though, is that is actually the vegan approach is more advantageous than the animal-based approach, and I disagree with that. I think that you can. There's no emerging trends of one being better than the other.
I can imagine, and kind of sort of what you said about the maybe potential hidden agenda. I think one of the main stories is that documentary is produced by James Cameron, who's just bought into a protein company, so a vegan protein company. So obviously there is stuff like that. So when someone says to you, "Oh mate, I saw Game Changer, I'm going vegan now," do you try and not talk them out of it, but do you explain what that actually entails and what they'd be giving up?
Yeah. So again, I'll try not to go complete opposite side to try and kind of, because everyone has their biases, whether they know it or not, they do, including me. And I've got to be really impartial to kind of help that person make the right decision. So I'm not going to say that Game Changers was a load of crap, because that's not, even though I think deep down, I could give you a 30-minute justification on why I feel that way, but if you just come out with those words, it's not really helping the person. So I'd give them I'd balance the argument a bit more to show them some of the other side, so then they can use both decisions for both parts to make the best decision for them. So where it might impact the health, where it might impact the performance. But the main interesting thing is, with a lot of research studies that were mentioned in that film, they often cite that kind of going vegan is better for health than if you're a meat eater. Now, when you look at the research between vegans and meat eaters, the research does support in favor of vegans. But the issue that you've got is this is like observational research. You're looking at large populations of people. If you look at meat eaters, they often tend to smoke, drink, they don't exercise, they have sedentary behaviors. But then if you actually make that question a little bit better, and we test, and specifically test, we're not just looking at populations, we test vegans and then health-seeking meat eaters. So people you find in the health shops that also eat meat, people that exercise, they don't smoke, they don't excessively drink, the health outcomes between the two are actually the same.
That's interesting. Like I say, I think when people, it's like old school. When people associate meat eaters, it's people that have a beer, have a burger, and kind of don't exercise, don't take care of themselves. But when you hear someone's a vegan, you can't help but think they're incredibly healthy, which isn't always the case as well.
Yeah, is it just that it's because they're vegan, or is there certain other health characteristics that's coming along with that? And then when you look at health-seeking meat eaters, you actually get the same outcomes in terms of like mortality, and morbidity, so like death and disease.
That's an interesting point. Did any of your athletes, or come over you and say, "Oh, you've seen Game Changers"?
Probably, I can probably count the ones that didn't more easily. I think it was most of them that did. Yeah. So, and these things catch on because how many people are using Netflix, and to be honest, it highlights to me that how many of my athletes are going to find it easier to go and watch that documentary versus picking up a scientific paper. So that kind of highlights, is the information getting delivered across properly as it should to actually help them get the best information?
Yeah, that's it, mate. Again, I'm the exact same. It's high level. It's obviously, if it's James Cameron produced, it's obviously going to be a beautiful looking documentary. You're going to watch it, you're going to think this is incredible. So
yeah.
I was as well. I started looking into it, and I thought, I don't think I could actually do this full time. But you can definitely see some, like you say, plant-based diets. Nothing wrong with them. It's just the, what you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's about making the right decision, but making an informed one that's best for you.
And that's it, mate. That really is it. So, Sam, I don't want to take too much more of your time. So I kind of just want to have a quick chat about, yourself and kind of going into 2020 now. Like, what's kind of the plan for yourselves?
So we've got quite a big year ahead, really. I'm hoping to, kind of work with more fighters, at all levels. So we're going to look to start doing some seminars across the country to help fighters with their nutrition. So those that, for whatever reason, of accessibility or funding, that maybe can't afford to have work with a nutritionist one-to-one, we're going to kind of deliver many seminars to help them get cutting-edge information so they can apply that to their own to their own sport and training, so they can make weight safer and more optimally, so they can actually hit the potential. Then we've got Jack Catterall with, hopefully, it'll be in 2020, his world title shot.
I'll say, yeah, 'cause his rank now is, I think, in the WBO, is he ranked 4 or 3? He's gone to number 1 now.
Yeah, obviously Ramirez is the title holder.
Yeah.
But he's got to, so the WBO issued the mandatory, but the WBC issued it first. So he's got to kind of do the WBC mandatory, and then Jack after that, depending on, of course, what the outcome is of that fight.
Okay, yeah, no, will make sense, mate. But that's the beauty of boxing. There's always a boxing board ahead of the other, so it's always an interesting one. But obviously, so you got Jack looking at that one. You're looking to do the courses. That course, mate, that sounds phenomenal. I'll definitely be up for joining that, and definitely be posting that out for yourselves, because that is, I think that's something. I look around and I see these fighters, and they just need a bit of guidance and just a bit of a guideline. So mate, that would be.
It's how it's delivered as well. I think that with your page, and I was one of my fighters, Jake James. He introduced me to your Instagram page.
Yeah,
and I think that one of the great ways, I think, that of getting the point across is, sometimes people say to me, and this is quite humbling for me to say, is kind of, 2 ways of giving information. Either, just shut up and tell me what to eat, geek, or it's, I really find that science interesting, so tell me more. But then you've also got the other approach, that if you can add comedy or humour whilst you're educating, I think that is an absolute winner. So like some of the posts that you're putting across that I've seen, like with the coach saying that we're all weighing in today, and there was a video of a guy running off.
Yeah, roll side, yeah.
Yeah, that is really funny, and it prompts discussion. People are going to ask, kind of, have you ever done that? Yeah, and then they ask why, and then that prompts critical thinking, and it prompts action to hopefully improve that sort of stuff. So I think that's great what you're doing as well, in terms of prompting that discussion and critical thinking, so we get these better outcomes.
No, mate, I appreciate that. And you do see some PTs, they do the comedy side, like what's the guy's name? James Smith. Yeah. Like, he's not always my cup of tea. I don't mind the guy, but he's definitely getting his point across, and he's getting a reaction. So, and he's asking the questions. So, you got to say fair play to that. But I do appreciate that, Sam, mate. And going for your one, you can see that you actually truly care about your athletes, and you're looking to push it forward, mate. So I cannot wait to to kind of see what's next for yourselves. And hopefully, if you're down south, I'll be jumping on that course straight away, and I'll be bringing my boxing club with me.
Thank you, Don. Much appreciated.
Go ahead, then, mate. So I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your day, but have a good one. Have yourself a good Christmas and stuff, and I'll be speaking to you very soon.
You too, Dom, and thank you for having me on. Much appreciated.
Anytime, mate. See you later.
Take care, mate.
Bye.